In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a rich man drops dead at a charity fete, poisoned in front of everyone. Miss Jane Marple, the sharp-eyed old lady, spots a tiny clue, a torn handkerchief that no one else notices. As gossip swirls around, a shady outsider, Miss Marple unravels secrets of jealousy, betrayal, and revenge. With a single photo and a clever trap, she exposes the killer, a trusted villager, in seconds, proving the smallest things catch the biggest criminals. Chapter 1. The Charity Fete. The sun shone brightly over St. Mary Mead, a sleepy little village where everyone knew everyone else's business. It was the day of the annual charity fete, and the whole place buzzed with excitement. The village green was decked out with colourful banners, stalls selling homemade jam and knitted scarves, and a big tent for the main event. A mock auction to raise money for the local hospital. Children ran around, giggling, clutching toffee apples, while grown-ups chatted over cups of tea. Miss Jane Marple, a small white-haired lady with sharp blue eyes, sat under a shady tree with her friend Mrs. Bantry, watching the cheerful chaos. Miss Marple loved these village gatherings. They were perfect for noticing things, little things that others missed. She wore her usual tweed skirt and a neat blouse, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on a pale pink scarf. Her eyes, though, weren't on the wool. They darted around, taking in every detail. The way Mrs. Hartnell fussed over her cake stall, the nervous twitch in young Tommy's smile as he sold raffle tickets, and the loud laugh of Mr. Harold Grayson, the village's richest man, who stood near the auction tent, waving his gold watch like a prize. "Jane," Mrs. Bantry said, fanning herself with a programme, "don't you ever get tired of watching people? You look like you're solving a puzzle." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling. "People are puzzles, Dolly. You just need to find the right pieces." Mrs. Bantry laughed. "You and your ideas. I swear you could spot a secret from a mile away." Miss Marple didn't answer, but her smile grew. She'd solved plenty of secrets in St. Mary Mead, though she never bragged. She just watched and listened, piecing together bits of gossip and odd looks until they made sense. Today, though, she hoped for a peaceful afternoon. The fete was for a good cause, and she didn't expect trouble. The auction tent was the heart of the event. Mr. Grayson, a tall man with a red face and a booming voice, was the star. He'd donated his fancy antique watch, a shiny gold thing that sparkled in the sunlight. Everyone knew he loved showing off, but they didn't mind. His money kept the village hall in good shape, and his donations always brought in big bids. Today he was in high spirits, joking with the crowd and sipping from a glass of lemonade. "Look at Harold," Mrs. Bantry whispered. "Thinks he's king of the village." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on Grayson's glass. It was a tall, clear one, filled with pale yellow lemonade. Something about it caught her attention. A faint, odd smell, like bitter almonds, drifting her way when the breeze shifted. She frowned but said nothing. Maybe it was just her imagination. The auction began, and the tent filled with people. Mr. Clement, the vicar, acted as auctioneer, his voice cheerful as he called out items. A quilt from Mrs. Price, a set of old books from the vicarage, and finally, Grayson's watch. The crowd clapped as Grayson stepped onto the small wooden stage, holding the watch high. "Who'll start the bidding?" Mr. Clement asked. This fine piece could fetch £100 for our hospital." Hands shot up, and the bidding climbed fast. Miss Marple watched, her needles still clicking. She noticed Grayson's son, Roger, standing near the back of the tent. Roger was a thin, pale man in his 30s, with a sulky look. He didn't bid, just stared at his father with tight lips. Next to him was Clara, Grayson's young wife, who looked bored, twirling a strand of her blonde hair. Clara was at least 20 years younger than Grayson, and village gossip said she married him for his money. Miss Marple didn't always believe gossip, but she kept it in mind. Then there was Mr. Lynch, a stranger in the village. He was a travelling salesman, tall and wiry, with a sharp face and quick eyes. He'd arrived a few days ago, staying at the Blue Boar Inn, and some said he'd argued with Grayson about a business deal. Lynch was bidding on the watch, his voice loud and confident, but his eyes kept flicking to Grayson, not the auctioneer. Miss Marple tilted her head. Something about Lynch felt off, like a cat watching a mouse. The bidding hit £150, and the crowd gasped. Grayson beamed, clearly pleased. He took a big gulp of his lemonade, then raised the glass to toast the bidders. "Keep going, folks," he boomed. "It's for a good cause." Suddenly, his face changed. His smile froze, and his hand clutched his chest. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the stage. Grayson staggered, his eyes wide, then collapsed with a thud. The crowd gasped, some screaming. Mrs. Bantry grabbed Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, what's happened?" Miss Marple was already on her feet, her knitting forgotten. "Stay here, Dolly," she said calmly, moving toward the stage. Her eyes scanned the scene. The broken glass, the spilled lemonade, Grayson's still form. She didn't need to get closer to know he was dead. That bitter almond smell was stronger now, and she knew it wasn't just lemonade. Dr. Sims, the new village doctor, pushed through the crowd. He was a short man with thinning hair and quick hands. He knelt beside Grayson, checking his pulse, then looked up, his face grim. "He's gone," he said. "Heart attack, maybe." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A heart attack didn't smell like bitter almonds. She glanced at the crowd. Roger stood frozen, his face pale. Clara was crying, but her tears looked forced, like an actress in a play. Lynch had slipped to the edge of the tent, his hands in his pockets, watching everything. Miss Marple's mind raced. Poison, she thought. But who? And how? Inspector Craddock arrived within the hour, his police car kicking up dust on the village. Green. He was a young man, serious but polite, and he knew Miss Marple's knack for solving mysteries. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat, "I hope you're not already ahead of me." She smiled faintly. "I'm just an old lady enjoying the fete, Inspector." He chuckled, but his eyes were sharp. "Right. Let's see what we've got." The police cordoned off the stage, and Dr. Sims spoke to Craddock in low tones. Miss Marple lingered nearby, pretending to adjust her hat. She heard Dr. Sims say, "Could be poison. Cyanide, maybe. That smells a giveaway." Craddock nodded. "We'll need tests. Any idea how it got in his drink?" Dr. Sims shook his head. "The glass is smashed, hard to say." Miss Marple's mind was already working. Cyanide worked fast. Seconds, not minutes. Grayson had been fine until that last sip. Someone must have slipped the poison into his glass during the auction. But who had the chance? She thought back. Grayson had been holding the glass all morning, sipping now and then. She'd seen him set it down only once, when he was adjusting his watch for the auctioneer. The stage was crowded then, with people coming and going. She glanced at Roger. He'd been near the stage, sulking. Clara had been, closer, fussing with her handbag. Lynch had been in the crowd, but he'd moved toward the stage during the bidding. And Dr. Sims, he'd handed Grayson a fresh glass of lemonade just before the auction started, saying something about keeping the star hydrated. Miss Marple's fingers paused on her hat. Dr. Sims had been so quick to call it a heart attack. Too quick, maybe. Mrs. Bantry hurried over, her face flushed. "Jane, this is awful! Poor Mr. Grayson! Who would do such a thing? Someone who wanted him gone," Miss Marple said softly, "and someone who knew exactly when to act." Mrs. Bantry stared. "You think it was murder? Already?" Miss Marple didn't answer. She was watching Clara, who was now talking to Roger, her hand on his arm. Roger pulled away, his face angry. Miss Marple filed that away. Family trouble, perhaps, or something more. The crowd was thinning out, the fete ruined. Stalls were packing up, and children were being hustled home. Inspector Craddock was questioning, people starting with Lynch, who looked annoyed but answered smoothly. Miss Marple didn't join in. She sat back down under her tree, picking up her knitting. Her eyes, though, never stopped moving. "Dolly," she said, "do you remember who was near Mr. Grayson when he got his lemonade?" Mrs. Bantry frowned. "Well, Dr. Sims gave it to him, I think, and Clara was fussing about as usual. Roger was off sulking somewhere. Oh, and that Lynch fellow was hanging around, looking sneaky." Miss Marple nodded. "And the glass? Did you notice anything odd about it?" Mrs. Bantry thought hard. "It was just a glass, clear, with lemonade." "Why?" Miss Marple didn't answer. That bitter almond smell wasn't just in her head. Cyanide, Dr. Sims had said. But how had it gotten into the glass? And why had Grayson's death come so fast, right in front of everyone? She looked at the stage, now empty except for a policeman guarding the broken glass. Something caught her eye. A tiny piece of cloth, caught on a splinter of the stage. It was white, like a handkerchief, but too small to be sure. She made a mental note to tell Craddock later. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the green, Miss Marple felt a familiar tingle. This wasn't just a death. It was a puzzle, and someone in St. Mary Mead was hiding a dark secret. She didn't know who yet, but she would. People always gave themselves away in the little things. A glance, a word, a smell. And Miss Marple was very good at noticing. "Jane," Mrs. Bantry said, "you've got that look again. You're going to solve this, aren't you?" Miss Marple's needles clicked. "I'll do my best, Dolly. I'll do my best." Chapter 2. The Suspicious Outsider. The village green was quiet now, the cheerful buzz of the charity fete replaced by whispers and worried glances. The sun was still high, but St. Mary Mead felt colder, as if Mr. Grayson's sudden death had cast a shadow over everything. Miss Jane Marple sat on a bench near the vicarage, her knitting needles clicking softly, her sharp blue eyes scanning the villagers as they lingered in small groups, talking in hushed tones. Mrs. Bantry stood nearby, clutching her hat and muttering about how dreadful it all was. "Poison, they're saying," Mrs. Bantry whispered, leaning closer. Cyanide, Jane. Can you believe it? Right here in our village." Miss Marple nodded, her face calm, but her mind racing. Cyanide was fast and deadly, and that bitter almond smell from Grayson's glass was unmistakable. Someone had slipped it into his lemonade, and they'd done it in front of a crowd. Bold, she thought, or desperate. She glanced at the auction tent, now roped off by Inspector Craddock's men. The broken glass was gone, taken for tests, but that tiny scrap of white cloth on the stage still nagged at her. A handkerchief, maybe. She'd point it out to Craddock later. The villagers were already picking their villain. Mr. Lynch, the travelling salesman, was the talk of the day. Miss Marple watched him now, standing by the Blue Boar Inn's gate, lighting a cigarette. Ike was tall, with a sharp face and quick, restless eyes that darted around like he was waiting for trouble. Gossip had spread fast. Lynch had argued with Grayson the day before the fete, something about a bad business deal. Mrs. Price, who ran the post office, swore she'd seen them shouting outside the inn. Lynch waving his arms, and Grayson red in the face. "He's not one of us," Mrs. Bantry said, following Miss Marple's gaze. "Shady, if you ask me. Bet he slipped something into that glass." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Maybe," she said softly, "but he's awfully obvious. Don't you think?" Mrs. Bantry blinked. "Obvious? Jane, he's a stranger. Strangers do these things." Miss Marple smiled faintly. Lynch was a perfect suspect, too perfect. In her experience, the real culprit was rarely the one everyone pointed at first. She'd seen it before in St. Mary, Mead, the loud, suspicious outsider who turned out to be innocent, while the true villain hid in plain sight. Still, she watched Lynch as he stubbed out his cigarette and walked toward the police, his shoulders stiff. He didn't look guilty, she thought. He looked nervous. Inspector Craddock was busy questioning people near the tent. He'd already spoken to Roger, Grayson's son, and Clara, his young wife. Now he was with Lynch, notebook in hand. Miss Marple couldn't hear their words, but she saw Lynch's hands move fast, like he was explaining something big. Craddock's face stayed blank, but he wrote quickly. Miss Marple's needles paused. Lynch's story would matter, but not as much as the little things. His quick glances, the way he kept his hands in his pockets, the slight shake in his fingers when he lit that cigarette. "Dolly," Miss Marple said, "what exactly did Mrs. Price say about that argument?" Mrs. Bantry loved gossip and was happy to repeat it. "Oh," she said, Lynch was furious. Something about Grayson promising to invest in his business, some fancy gadget Lynch was selling, and then backing out. Mrs. Price said Grayson called him a cheat, and Lynch shouted he'd regret it. Miss Marple nodded. A motive, certainly, but shouting in public wasn't the mark of a clever poisoner. Cyanide needed planning, not a hot temper. She thought back to the fete. Lynch had been near the stage, bidding on Grayson's watch, but she hadn't seen him touch the glass. Someone else had been closer, someone who didn't stand out. Her eyes drifted to Dr. Sims, the new village doctor, who was talking to a policeman near the stage. He was short, with thinning hair and a kind smile that made people trust him. He'd been the first to check Grayson's body, calling it a heart attack before mentioning cyanide. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her needles. Why had he been so quick to suggest a heart attack? And why had he handed Grayson that glass of lemonade Just before the auction, she remembered his words. "Keep hydrated, Harold." It had seemed friendly at the time, but now it felt convenient. "Jane, you're doing it again," Mrs. Bantry said, nudging her. "That look, you're thinking something." Miss Marple chuckled. "I'm just an old lady, Dolly. My mind wanders." Mrs. Bantry snorted. "Wanders right to the truth, more like." Miss Marple didn't argue. She was thinking about the lemonade. The fete had a big table near the tent with pitchers of lemonade for everyone. Anyone could have poured a glass, but Dr. Sims had made a point of handing one to Grayson. She'd seen him fill it from a pitcher, his back to the crowd for just a moment, long enough to slip something in. Maybe. But Dr. Sims was new, well-liked, and had no obvious reason to want Grayson dead. Or did he? She made a mental note to ask about Sims's history. St. Mary Mead loved its gossip, and someone would know if he'd ever crossed paths with Grayson before coming to the village. For now, she turned her attention to Roger and Clara, who were standing near the vicarage gate. Roger's face was still pale, his hands stuffed in his pockets. Clara was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, but Miss Marple noticed her tears dried quickly. Clara's handbag, a fancy leather one, caught her eye again. At the fete, she'd seen Clara open it, revealing a small glass vial. Perfume, perhaps. But it had looked odd, like something from a chemist's shop. "Poor Clara," Mrs. Bantry said. "She's so young to be a widow." Miss Marple didn't reply. Clara's tears didn't fool her. She'd seen plenty of young wives play the grieving widow, only to hide darker secrets. And Roger, his sulky silence wasn't just grief. He'd never gotten along with his father. Grayson had called him lazy, refusing to hand over the family business. Had Roger been angry enough to act? Poison was a coward's weapon, and Roger didn't strike her as bold. But anger could push anyone too far. The village clock struck 4, and Inspector Craddock walked over, looking tired. "Miss Marple," he said, "you were near the stage. Did you see anything unusual?" She smiled, her eyes twinkling. "I'm afraid I was just enjoying the auction, Inspector. But I did notice Mr. Grayson's glass had a funny smell, like almonds, but bitter." Craddock's eyes sharpened. "You caught that too? We're testing the glass, or what's left of it. Cyanide's likely. Any idea who was near him?" Miss Marple thought carefully. She didn't want to point fingers yet, not without more pieces. "Well," she said, "Dr. Sims gave him the lemonade. Clara was close by, and Roger was at the back. Mr. Lynch was in the crowd, bidding. That's all I saw." Craddock scribbled in his notebook. "Thanks. That Lynch fellow's got a temper. We're checking his story about that argument with Grayson." Miss Marple nodded, but said nothing. She didn't think Lynch was the answer. He was too loud, too noticeable. The real culprit would be quieter, someone who blended in. She glanced at Dr. Sims again, now helping a policeman carry a box of auction items. His smile was warm, but his hands moved quickly, like he was eager to be done. Nervous or just busy? Mrs. Bantry tugged her arm. "Jane, let's go to the vicarage. Mrs. Clement's serving tea, and I need something to calm my nerves." Miss Marple agreed, folding her knitting. Tea at the vicarage meant gossip, and gossip was better than any police report. As they walked, she overheard two women whispering about Lynch. "He's got shifty eyes," one said. "Bet he poisoned that glass when no one was looking." Miss Marple shook her head. Villagers loved a villain, especially an outsider, but she knew better. Evil wasn't always a stranger. At the vicarage, Mrs. Clement had set out a tray of tea and scones. The room was full of familiar faces. Mrs. Price still talking about Lynch's argument, Miss Hartnell complaining about the ruined fate, and young Tommy, the raffle boy, looking pale and jumpy. Miss Marple took a seat by the window, sipping her tea and listening. Mrs. Price was in full swing, telling everyone how Lynch had threatened Grayson. He said, "You'll pay for this, Harold," Mrs. Price declared. "I heard it myself." Miss Marple's ears perked up. "Mrs. Price," she said sweetly, "did you see Mr. Grayson with anyone else that day? Before the fete, perhaps?" Mrs. Price frowned, thinking. Well, Clara was at the house, looking cross. She and Harold had a row, I think. She was in the garden, muttering about being trapped. Miss Marple nodded, filing that away. Clara, unhappy in her marriage. Another piece of the puzzle. She glanced at Tommy, who was fidgeting with his teacup. "Tommy," she said, "you were near the lemonade table, weren't you? Did you see who poured Mr. Grayson's glass?" Tommy blushed, nearly dropping his cup. I don't know, Miss Marple. I was busy with tickets. Dr. Sims was there, I think. And Mrs. Grayson, Clara, she was nearby." Miss Marple smiled kindly. Tommy was nervous but not guilty. Just a boy caught in a grown-up mess. She'd keep an eye on him, though. Sometimes the innocent saw things others missed. As the tea party went on, Miss Marple's mind worked quietly. Lynch was the easy suspect, but he didn't feel right. Clara's vial, Roger's anger, Dr. Sims's quick hands, those were the threads she'd follow. Someone had planned this carefully, and they were still here, hiding behind a smile or a tear. The sun was setting as she and Mrs. Bantry left the vicarage. "Jane," Mrs. Bantry said, "you're going to figure this out, aren't you?" Miss Marple's needles clicked in her bag. "I hope so, Dolly. People always leave clues. You just have to look." Chapter 3. The Family Secrets. The morning after the charity fete, St. Mary Mead was still buzzing with whispers about Mr. Grayson's death. The village green, so lively yesterday, now felt empty, with only a few stray banners flapping in the breeze. Miss Jane Marple walked slowly toward Grayson's grand house on the edge of the village, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. Her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. The curtains twitching in neighbours' windows, the postman lingering to chat, the way the air seemed heavy with secrets. Mrs. Bantry had offered to come along, but Miss Marple wanted to visit alone. People talked more freely when they thought you were just a nosy old lady. Grayson's house was a big red-brick place with tall chimneys and rose bushes lining the path. It looked rich, like Grayson himself, but Miss Marple knew money didn't mean happiness. She knocked on the door, her face set in a gentle smile. Clara, Grayson's young widow, answered, her blonde hair loose and her eyes red, as if she'd been crying, or pretending to, Miss Marple thought. "Oh, Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice shaky, "it's kind of you to come. Everything's such a mess." "My dear," Miss Marple said, patting her arm, I just wanted to see how you're holding up. May I come in?" Clara nodded and led her into a sitting room filled with heavy furniture and polished silver. Roger, Grayson's son, was there, slouched in an armchair, a glass of water in his hand. He looked up, his thin face pale and his eyes tired. "Miss Marple," he muttered, barely polite. "What do you want?" "Just to offer my condolences," she said, sitting down. Her eyes flicked around the room, taking in the details. A photo of Grayson and Clara on their wedding day. Clara looking stiff. A stack of business papers on a desk, messy, as if someone had rifled through them. And Clara's leather handbag, resting on a side table, its clasp undone. "It's awful," Clara said, sinking onto a sofa. "Harold was fine yesterday morning. Then this." She dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, but Miss Marple noticed her fingers were steady, not trembling. "I'm sure it's a shock," Miss Marple said kindly. "He was such a strong man. Did he seem unwell before the fete?" Roger snorted. "Unwell? He was as stubborn as ever, never listened to anyone." His voice was bitter, and he took a quick sip of water, avoiding her gaze. Miss Marple tilted her head. Roger's anger wasn't new. She'd heard the village talk. Grayson thought his son was lazy, unfit to take over the family business. Roger wanted control, but Grayson wouldn't give it. That kind of resentment could fester. She made a note to watch him closely. Clara sighed. Harold was tired lately. Business troubles, you know. But he wouldn't slow down. Always showing off. At events like the fete, her voice had an edge, like she was tired of his ways. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to Clara's handbag again. At the fete, she'd seen that small glass vial inside. Perfume, Clara had said, but it looked like something from a chemist. Could it hold cyanide? She pushed the thought aside for now. "It must be hard for you both," she said. "Family is everything, isn't it?" Roger stood abruptly, his glass clinking on the table. Family? He didn't care about family. All he cared about was his money and that stupid watch. He stalked out, slamming the door. Clara shook her head. "He's upset, Miss Marple. Harold was hard on him." Miss Marple murmured sympathetically, but her mind was working. Roger's outburst was real, but was it grief or guilt? And Clara? Her tears were too perfect, like she'd practiced them. Miss Marple decided to test the waters. "Clara, dear," she said, "I saw you at the fete, near the lemonade table. You looked so busy. Did you help with the drinks?" Clara's eyes flicked up, sharp for a moment, then softened. "Oh, no, I was just checking on things. Harold asked me to make sure everything was perfect." She reached for her handbag, pulling it closer, her fingers brushing the clasp. Miss Marple smiled. "Of course, you're so devoted." But she'd seen that quick flash in Clara's eyes. Fear, maybe, or calculation. The handbag stayed in her thoughts. As Clara made tea, Miss Marple wandered to the desk, pretending to admire a vase. The business papers caught her eye. Letters about Grayson's investments, some marked with angry red ink. One name stood out, Dr. Sims. She remembered him handing Grayson the lemonade, his quick smile, his even quicker suggestion of a heart attack. Was there a connection? She needed more. Clara returned with a tray, and they sipped tea in silence. For a moment, Miss Marple decided to nudge again. "I saw Dr. Sims at the fete," she said casually. Such a kind man, giving Harold that lemonade. Were they close? Clara's cup paused halfway to her lips. Close, I suppose. Harold helped Sims set up his practice here years ago. They had some falling out, though. Business stuff. She waved a hand like it was nothing, but her voice was tight. Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her bag, seemed to click in her mind. A falling out. That was new. Dr. Sims had seemed friendly with Grayson, but old grudges could hide behind smiles. She thought of the handkerchief scrap on the stage. Had Sims dropped it? And why had he been so quick to call the death a heart attack? I should go, Miss Marple said, standing. You need rest, my dear. If you need anything, I'm just down the lane. Clara nodded, her smile thin. Thank you, Miss Marple. You're very kind. Outside the air was crisp, and Miss Marple walked slowly, thinking. Roger's anger, Clara's handbag, Sims's, past with Grayson. Each was a thread in the puzzle. She headed toward the village shop, where Miss Hartnell was sure to be gossiping. If anyone knew about Sims and Grayson, it would be her. The shop was busy, with villagers buying bread and swapping stories about the fate. Miss Hartnell stood behind the counter, her sharp eyes gleaming. Miss Marple, she called. Terrible. Business, isn't it? That Lynch fellow's to blame, mark my words. Shouting at poor Mr. Grayson like that. Miss Marple smiled. Perhaps. But tell me, Miss Hartnell, did you ever hear about Dr. Sims and Mr. Grayson? Clara mentioned a falling out. Miss Hartnell's eyes lit up. She loved a good story. Oh, yes. Years ago, before you moved here, Sims wanted Grayson to fund his medical practice. Grayson gave him some money, but not enough, and Sims was furious. Said Grayson cheated him. They didn't speak for ages, but Sims came back last year, all smiles. Funny, though, he was at the fete, right by Grayson. Miss Marple nodded, her mind slotting pieces together. Sims had a motive then, a grudge buried but not forgotten. And he'd been close to the lemonade. She thanked Miss Hartnell and bought a packet of tea, her excuse for the visit. As she stepped outside, she saw Inspector Craddock walking toward the Blue Boar Inn, likely to question Lynch again. The village still buzzed about the salesman, but Miss Marple wasn't convinced. Lynch was loud, obvious, the kind of suspect people loved to blame. But Poison was quiet, careful. Someone like Sims, with medical knowledge, or Clara, with her mysterious vial, fit better. She paused by the churchyard, watching a group of children play. One of them, young Tommy from the fete, was sitting alone, kicking stones. Miss Marple approached, her smile warm. "Tommy," she said, "you look troubled. Everything all right?" Tommy looked up, his face red. "It's just, Mr. Grayson. I saw something at the fete, but I don't want to get in trouble." Miss Marple sat beside him, her voice gentle. "You won't, dear. What did you see?" Tommy hesitated, then whispered, "Dr. Sims. He was by the lemonade table pouring a glass. He looked sneaky, like he didn't want anyone to see." Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "Thank you, Tommy. You're a good boy. Don't worry, I'll tell the inspector." Tommy nodded, relieved, and ran off. Miss Marple sat a moment longer, thinking. Sims, again. The lemonade, the handkerchief. And now, a boy's nervous words. The puzzle was growing, but the pieces weren't clear yet. She needed more. something to tie it all together. As she walked home, the village seemed to watch her, its quiet houses hiding secrets. Roger's anger could be a motive, but he seemed too clumsy for poison. Clara's vial was suspicious, but she was careful, maybe too careful. Lynch was still the village's favourite villain, but Miss Marple doubted him. Dr. Sims, though, his smile, his quick hands, his past with Grayson, kept coming back. She reached her cottage, the roses by her gate glowing in the evening light. Inside, she set her knitting on the table and made tea, her mind still working. The cyanide had been in the glass, and someone had put it there during the fete. Sims had the chance, and now she knew he had a reason. But Clara's vial nagged at her, and Roger's bitterness couldn't be ignored. "Dolly's right," she murmured to herself, sipping her tea. "I do love a puzzle." She'd visit the vicarage tomorrow, where more gossip would flow. Someone would slip, say something small, a name, a look, a mistake, and Miss Marple would be listening. Chapter 4. The Village Gossip. The next morning, St. Mary Mead was alive with chatter, as if Mr. Grayson's death at the charity fete had stirred the village like a spoon in a teacup. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cosy cottage, sipping tea and thinking about the puzzle. Her knitting lay on the table, but her mind was on the clues. The bitter almond smell in Grayson's glass, the scrap of white cloth on the stage, Clara's mysterious vial, Roger's anger, and Dr. Sims's quick hands. The village was pointing fingers at Mr. Lynch, the outsider, but Miss Marple wasn't so sure. The real answer, she felt, was closer, hidden in the everyday talk of St. Mary Mead. She decided to visit Miss Hartnell's tea gathering at the village hall. If anyone knew more about Grayson's secrets, it would be there, wrapped in gossip over scones and jam. Miss Marple put on her best hat, a neat straw one with a blue ribbon, and tucked her knitting bag under her arm. As she walked down the lane, the village seemed to hum with suspicion. Curtains twitched, and neighbours whispered on doorsteps. Grayson's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was the biggest story in years. The village hall was a small stone building, with ivy creeping up the walls. Inside, Miss Hartnell had set out a long table with teapots, cups, and plates of homemade biscuits. A dozen women were there, their voices a soft buzz, like bees in a garden. Mrs. Bantry waved Miss Marple over, her face eager. "Jane, you're late. Everyone's talking about that awful Lynch man. They're sure he did it." Miss Marple smiled and took a seat, her eyes scanning the room. Mrs. Price was holding court, her loud voice carrying over the clink of cups. Miss Weatherby, the librarian, nodded along, her glasses slipping down her nose. Young Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, looked uncomfortable, stirring her tea too fast. Miss Marple settled in, her knitting needles clicking softly as she listened. "Mark my words," Mrs. Price was saying, "that Lynch is a villain. I saw him arguing with Mr. Grayson the day before the fete. Shouting he was, right outside. The blue boar said Grayson would regret crossing him." Miss Hartnell nodded. "He's not one of us. Shifty eyes, that one. Bet he slipped poison in that lemonade when no one was looking." Miss Marple's needles paused. She'd heard this before, but it felt too neat. Lynch was loud, angry, and new, perfect for gossip, but not for a careful crime like poisoning. Cyanide needed planning, not a public row. She sipped her tea and said Mrs. Price. "You have such a good memory. Did you hear anything else about Mr. Grayson? Any other quarrels?" Mrs. Price puffed up, pleased to be asked. "Well, now that you mention it, there was talk about a secret will. Grayson changed it last month, or so I heard from Mrs. Jenkins at the butcher's. Said he was cutting someone out, but she didn't know who." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. A will? That was new. Money was always a strong motive, especially in a family like Grayson's. She thought of Roger, sulky and bitter, and Clara, with her forced tears and that odd vial in her handbag. A changed will could point to either, or someone else entirely. Mrs. Clement spoke up, her voice soft. "I heard something too. At the fete, Dr. Sims was talking to Grayson before the auction. They seemed tense. Sims handed him that lemonade, and Grayson looked annoyed, like he didn't want it." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "Dr. Sims? How interesting. Were they close, do you think?" Mrs. Clement hesitated. Not really. Sims was grateful when Grayson helped him start his practice, but they had a falling out years ago. Something about money. Sims never forgot it, I think. Miss Hartnell leaned in, her voice low. "And Sims was right there when Grayson collapsed. Called it a heart attack straight away, didn't he? Bit quick, if you ask me." The room went quiet for a moment, the women exchanging looks. Miss Marple kept knitting, but her mind was racing. Dr. Sims kept coming up, his past with Grayson, his quick diagnosis, his hands on that lemonade glass, and young Tommy's words yesterday about Sims looking sneaky by the lemonade table stuck with her. She remembered the scrap of cloth on the stage, a handkerchief maybe, like the one Sims had been using at the fete. He'd pulled it out, often, wiping his hands, his forehead, looking nervous. Was it a clue, or just a habit? She decided to nudge the conversation. "Mrs. Hartnell," she said, "you always notice things. Did you see Dr. Sims at the lemonade table? Or anyone else near Mr. Grayson's glass?" Miss Hartnell frowned, thinking. Well, Sims was there, pouring drinks for a few people. Clara was nearby, fussing with her handbag. Roger was sulking at the back as usual, and that Lynch fellow was hanging about, watching everyone. Hard to say who touched what, with all the bustle. Miss Marple nodded. The lemonade table was key. Anyone could have slipped cyanide into Grayson's glass, but it had to be someone who knew he'd drink it soon. Sims had handed it to him, but Clara had been close, and Roger wasn't far. Lynch was in the crowd. But had he been close enough? She needed more, a solid clue to narrow it down. Mrs. Price piped up again. "You know, I saw Clara arguing with Grayson that morning in their garden. She looked cross, like she was trapped. Bet she was tired of him. Young wife, old husband. Makes you wonder." Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. Clara's unhappiness was clear, and that vial in her handbag was suspicious. Poison was a woman's weapon sometimes, but Clara seemed too careful to leave such an obvious clue. Still, Miss Marple filed it away, along with the talk of the will. If Grayson had cut Clara or Roger out, either might have a reason to act. The tea party went on, with more gossip about Lynch's shady business deals and Grayson's wealth. Miss Marple listened, letting the chatter wash over her like a stream, picking out the shiny pebbles of truth. She thought of her nephew Raymond, who once said village gossip was like a spider's web. messy, but it caught things. She smiled at the memory. Raymond would laugh at her now, sitting here, unravelling a murder. As the women started to leave, Miss Marple lingered, helping Mrs. Clement clear the cups. "Mrs. Clement," she said, "you were at the fete all day. Did you notice Dr. Sims's handkerchief? He seemed to use it a lot." Mrs. Clement looked surprised. "His handkerchief?" "Well, yes, he was wiping his hands with it, especially when he poured the lemonade. I thought he was just fussy." "Why?" "Oh, no reason," Miss Marple said, smiling. "Just something I noticed." But it wasn't just something. That handkerchief nagged at her, like a loose thread in her knitting. Had Sims used it to hide the cyanide? To wipe the glass clean of traces? She remembered the scrap of cloth on the stage, white and torn. If it matched Sims's handkerchief, it could be the key. She needed to see it, but the police had likely taken it by now. Outside, the village was settling into the afternoon. Miss Marple walked toward the church, where she often found Inspector Craddock taking a break. Sure enough, he was there, sitting on a bench, his notebook open. "Miss Marple," he said, looking up. "You're everywhere today." She smiled. "Just enjoying the village, Inspector. Any news on that scrap of cloth from the stage?" Craddock's eyes narrowed. "You don't miss much, do you? It's a piece of white linen, maybe from a handkerchief. No traces of poison yet, but we're testing it." "Why?" Miss Marple shrugged. "It just caught my eye. Dr. Sims was using a handkerchief at the fete, wasn't he? Wiping his hands a lot." Craddock scribbled a note. "He was. I'll check it. Sims says he was just helping out, but we're looking into his past with Grayson. That falling out Mrs. Clement mentioned sounds like bad blood." Miss Marple nodded, her face innocent. "I'm sure you'll find the truth, Inspector." As Craddock went back to his notes, Miss Marple walked home, her mind spinning. The will, Sims's handkerchief, Clara's vial, Roger's anger. Each was a piece, but the picture wasn't clear yet. Sims was rising to the top, though. His medical knowledge meant he'd know cyanide, and his grudge gave him a reason. But Clara's odd behaviour and Roger's bitterness couldn't be ignored. And Lynch? The village loved him as a villain, but Miss Marple still doubted him. He was too loud, too obvious. At her cottage, she sat by the window, watching the roses sway in the breeze. She thought of a girl she'd known years ago, a quiet maid who'd poisoned her mistress out of jealousy. She'd been so sweet, so trusted, until the truth came out. People hid their darkness well, but they always left clues. A word, a look, a handkerchief. "Dolly will want to hear this," Miss Marple murmured, smiling. She'd call Mrs. Bantry later, maybe invite her for tea. But for now, she'd keep listening, keep watching. The village was talking, and sooner or later, someone would say too much. Chapter 5. The Clue in the Handkerchief. The sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting golden light across the village as Miss Jane Marple walked toward the police station, her knitting bag swinging gently at her side. Her sharp blue eyes were calm, but her mind buzzed with the pieces of the puzzle surrounding Mr. Grayson's death at the charity fete. The bitter almond smell of cyanide, the scrap of white cloth on the stage, Clara's mysterious vial, Roger's simmering anger, and Dr. Sims's quick hands all danced in her thoughts. The village was still blaming Mr. Lynch, the loud outsider. But Miss Marple's instincts pointed elsewhere, towards someone quieter, someone trusted. Dr. Sims, with his nervous handkerchief and old grudge against Grayson, was rising fast in her mind. The police station was a small brick building next to the post office, its windows glowing in the evening light. Miss Marple had decided to talk to Inspector Craddock about that scrap of cloth she'd noticed on the stage. It was likely a piece of a handkerchief, and Dr. Sims had been wiping his hands with one at the fete, looking jittery. If it matched, it could be the thread that unravelled the mystery. She knocked lightly, and Craddock opened the door, his face tired but friendly. "Miss Marple," he said, pulling out a chair. "I should have known you'd show up. Got another hunch?" She smiled, settling into the chair with her knitting, bag on her lap. "Just a thought, Inspector. That piece of cloth from the stage. Any news on it?" Craddock leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "You're sharp, aren't you? It's linen, white, finely woven. Could be from a handkerchief, but no poison traces yet. The lab's still testing. Why's it interest you?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she pulled out her knitting, more to keep her hands busy than to work. "Oh, I just noticed Dr. Sims using a handkerchief at the fete. He was wiping his hands a lot, especially near the lemonade table. Seemed nervous, I thought." Craddock's eyes narrowed, and he jotted something in his notebook. "Sims, eh? He's been helpful, but maybe too helpful. Keeps saying it was a heart attack, even though the cyanide's obvious now. And we found something. Sims and Grayson had a big falling out years ago. Grayson promised to fund Sims's medical practice, then pulled out at the last minute. Sims lost a lot of money, nearly went bankrupt." Miss Marple nodded, her face innocent but her mind racing. That grudge was stronger than she'd thought. A man like Sims with medical knowledge would know how to get cyanide and how to use it without leaving a trace. And that handkerchief, had he used it to handle the poison, to keep his hands clean? She remembered young Tommy's words, Sims looking sneaky by the lemonade table. It was adding up, but she needed more. "Inspector," she said, "did you check Dr. Sims's handkerchief, the one he was using?" Craddock frowned. "Not yet. He's got a dozen of them, probably. But I'll have a look. Anything else you noticed?" Miss Marple hesitated. She didn't want to point fingers too soon, not without solid proof. Clara's vial and Roger's anger were still in the picture, and even Lynch, the village's favourite villain, couldn't be ruled out entirely. "Just keep an eye on that cloth," she said. "Little things matter, don't they?" Craddock chuckled. "You sound like my old sergeant. I'll check it, Miss Marple, and I'm digging into Sims's past. If he's hiding something, I'll find it." She thanked him and left, her steps slow as she walked back through the village. The air was cool now, and the streets were quiet, but St. Mary Mead was never truly still. Eyes watched from windows, and whispers followed her like shadows. She thought of the fete again, replaying it in her mind. Grayson sipping his lemonade, Sims handing him the glass, Clara fussing with her handbag, Roger sulking at the back, and that scrap of cloth caught on the stage's splintered edge. It was small, but small things could break a case wide open. As she passed the village shop, Mrs. Price called out from the doorway, "Miss Marple, heard the latest. They're saying Lynch tried to buy cyanide from a chemist in the next town." "Miss, Marple stopped, her smile polite. "Really? Who said that?" "Mrs. Jenkins, from the butcher's. Her cousin works at the chemist's. Said Lynch was asking odd questions last week." Miss Marple nodded, but her heart sank a little. Gossip spread fast, and it was muddying the waters. Lynch was an easy target, too easy. If he'd been asking about cyanide, he was either very foolish or very innocent. A clever poisoner wouldn't be so careless. She thanked Mrs. Price and kept walking, her mind on Sims. His handkerchief was the key. She was sure, if it matched the scrap, it could place him at the crime's heart. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple decided to call Mrs. Bantry. Gossip was one thing, but Dolly Bantry had a knack for hearing things others missed. She dialed the number, and Mrs. Bantry's cheerful voice answered. "Jane, I was just thinking of you. The village is in a tizzy about that Lynch fellow. They're ready to lock him up." Miss Marple chuckled. "Let them talk, Dolly. I want to know about Dr. Sims. You were at the fete all day. Did you see him with his handkerchief, or anything odd about him?" Mrs. Bantry thought for a moment. "Well, he was fussing with that handkerchief now that you mention it. Kept pulling it out, wiping his hands, his face, like he was sweating buckets. And he was by the lemonade table pouring drinks. I thought he was just being helpful, but, well, he did look nervous when Grayson took that glass." Miss Marple's needles, still in her bag, seemed to click in her head. Nervous. That word kept coming up. Sims had been calm when he checked Grayson's body, but nervous before. "Why?" She thanked Mrs. Bantry and hung up, her mind turning to the next step. She needed to see that handkerchief, or the scrap from the stage. If they matched, it could tie Sims to the poison. The next morning, Miss Marple headed to the village hall, where the fete's organisers were sorting leftover items. Mrs. Clement was there, stacking boxes of unsold raffle prizes. "Miss Marple," she said, smiling, "come to help?" "Just to chat," Miss Marple said, her eyes scanning the room. "Did the police take everything from the stage?" Mrs. Clement nodded. "Most of it. The broken glass, some papers, that bit of cloth you mentioned." "Why?" Miss Marple smiled. "Just curious. Did you ever see Dr. Sims drop his handkerchief? He was using it a lot." Mrs. Clement frowned, thinking. "Drop it? No, but he was waving it around, especially when he poured the lemonade. I saw him stuff it in his pocket after giving Grayson the glass. Looked like he was in a hurry." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "In a hurry?" Another piece. If Sims had dropped a piece of his handkerchief on the stage, maybe torn when he set down the glass, it could be the clue she needed. She thanked Mrs. Clement and left, her mind made up. She talked to Craddock again, but first she wanted to see Sims herself. Dr. Sims's clinic was a small building near the church, its sign gleaming with fresh paint. Miss Marple knocked, and Sims opened the door, his kind smile in place. "Miss Marple, what brings you here? Not feeling ill, I hope?" "Oh, no," she said, stepping inside. "Just a neighbourly visit. Such a terrible thing about Mr. Grayson." Sims's smile faded slightly. "Awful! I tried to help, but, well, it was too late." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes flicking to his desk. A stack of handkerchiefs sat there, white and neatly folded. "You were so quick to check him," she said. "I noticed you used your handkerchief a lot that day. Handy things, aren't they?" Sims's hand twitched just for a second. "Oh, yes, Habit of mine, keeps my hands clean." He laughed, but it sounded forced. She smiled, her face all innocence. "I suppose you need them, being a doctor. Did you lose one at the fete? I saw a scrap of cloth on the stage." Sims's eyes flickered, and he busied himself with some papers. "Lose one? No, I don't think so. Must have been someone else's." Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was shouting. He was nervous, too nervous. She thanked him and left, her heart pounding. Sims was hiding something, and that handkerchief was the key. She needed to get Craddock to compare it to the scrap before Sims got rid of it. As she walked home, the village seemed to close in around her. Clara's vial still nagged at her. Could it hold cyanide? And Roger's anger was a dark cloud, but he didn't seem clever enough for poison. Lynch was still the village's scapegoat. But Miss Marple was more certain than ever. Sims was the one to watch. His medical knowledge, his grudge, his nervous hands, all pointed to him. At her cottage, she sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. She thought of a case years ago, a quiet man who'd poisoned his rival with a smile. Sims reminded her of him, trusted, calm, but with a secret burning inside. The handkerchief was her best clue, but she needed proof. Tomorrow she'd push Craddock to act. The village was full of talk, but talk wasn't enough. The truth was in the details, and Miss Marple was very good at details. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting soft patterns on the floor. She sat at her small table, sipping tea, her knitting untouched. Her sharp blue eyes were distant, piecing together the puzzle of Mr. Grayson's death at the charity fete, the bitter almond smell of cyanide, the scrap of white cloth on the stage, Clara's mysterious vial, Roger's anger, and Dr. Sims's nervous handkerchief. They all swirled in her mind. The village was still buzzing about Mr. Lynch, the outsider, but Miss Marple's instincts pointed to Dr. Sims. His old grudge against Grayson, his medical knowledge, and that handkerchief, always in his hand, made him the one to watch. Today, she'd pushed the investigation forward. Miss Marple had a plan. She'd noticed something at the fete, a photograph taken during the auction, snapped by young Tommy's uncle, who fancied himself a photographer. If it showed Sims near Grayson's glass, it could be the proof she needed. She'd also told Inspector Craddock about the handkerchief, and he'd promised to check if it matched the scrap from the stage. But Miss Marple wasn't one to wait. She wanted to see Sims's reaction herself, to nudge him into a mistake. People always slipped up when they felt trapped. She put on her coat and hat, a simple brown one with a small feather, and headed to the village hall. The fete's organisers were still sorting items, and Tommy's uncle, Mr. Bates, was there, showing off his photos. Miss Marple found him by a table, his camera slung around his neck, chatting with Mrs. Clement. "Mr. Bates," she said, her smile warm, "I heard you took such lovely pictures at the fete. Might I see them? I do love a good memory." Bates beamed, always eager to share. "Of course, Miss Marple. Got a whole stack here." He pulled out a folder of black and white prints. Spreading them on the table, Miss Marple leaned in, her eyes scanning each one. There were shots of the cake stall, children with toffee apples, and Grayson on the stage, holding his gold watch. Then she saw it. A photo of the auction's start, with Grayson sipping his lemonade. In the background, Dr. Sims stood by the lemonade table, his handkerchief in one hand, the other holding a glass. Grayson's glass. His face was turned slightly, as if checking no one was watching. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "What a fine shot," she said, pointing to the photo. "Might I borrow this one, for my scrapbook?" Bates nodded, pleased. "Take it, Miss Marple. I've got copies." She tucked the photo into her bag, her mind racing. The picture wasn't proof of poison, but it placed Sims at the right spot, at the right time, with that handkerchief. She thanked Bates and headed to the police station, where Inspector Craddock was sorting papers. "Miss Marple," he said, looking up, "you're back. Got something new?" She smiled, pulling out the photo. "Just this, Inspector. Look at Dr. Sims here, by the lemonade table. He's holding Mr. Grayson's glass, and that handkerchief of his. Quite a coincidence, don't you think?" Craddock studied the photo, his eyes narrowing. "Good catch. We checked his handkerchief. Same linen as the scrap from the stage, but no poison on it. Still, this puts him right there. I think it's time we talk to him." Miss Marple nodded, her face innocent. "Might I come along? I'd feel better knowing the village is safe." Craddock hesitated, then shrugged. "Why not? You've got a knack for this." They walked to Dr. Sims's clinic, the air crisp and the village quiet. Miss Marple's mind was sharp, planning her approach. She'd seen guilty people before, how they fidgeted, how their eyes darted when cornered. Sims was calm on the outside, but she'd noticed his twitchy hands, his forced smiles. If she could rattle him, he might slip. The clinic door was open, and Sims was inside writing at his desk. He looked up, his kind smile in place, but Miss Marple saw a flicker of worry in his eyes. "Inspector, Miss Marple," he said, standing. "What's this about?" Craddock held up the photo. "Dr. Sims, we're looking into Mr. Grayson's death. This picture shows you with his glass at the fete, right before he collapsed. Care to explain?" Sims's smile faltered, but he recovered fast. "Explain? I was just helping out, pouring drinks. Grayson was thirsty, so I gave him a glass. Nothing odd about that." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice gentle. "You were using your handkerchief a lot that day, Dr. Sims. Wiping your hands, your face. I noticed it in the photo, too. Did you drop it on the stage, perhaps?" Sims's hand twitched, and he reached for a pen, then stopped. "Drop it? No, I don't think so. I always keep it in my pocket." Craddock leaned forward. "We found a piece of linen on the stage, same as your handkerchief. Care to show us the one you were using?" Sims hesitated, then pulled a white handkerchief from his pocket. It was clean, neatly folded, but Miss Marple noticed a tiny fray at one corner, like it had been torn. Her heart skipped, but she kept, her face soft. "That's a fine handkerchief," she said. "Do you have others like it?" "Of course," Sims said, his voice tight. "I buy them by the dozen. Nothing special." Craddock took the handkerchief, bagging it for evidence. "We'll compare it to the scrap. And we're looking into your past with Grayson. That falling out over money sounds like you held a grudge." Sims's face reddened, but he forced a laugh. "A grudge? That was years ago. I was grateful to Harold, even after our disagreement. I'd never hurt him." Miss Marple watched his eyes. They darted to the desk where a stack of handkerchiefs sat, just like the ones she'd seen yesterday. She decided to push a little harder. "It's just so strange," she said, "how you called it a heart attack right away. Most people wouldn't notice cyanide so fast, but you did. Being a doctor, of course, you'd know." Sims's smile vanished. I was just guessing. The smell, you know. I'm trained to notice things." "Like poison?" Miss Marple asked, her voice still gentle but sharp underneath. Sims stood, his chair scraping. "Look, I'm busy. I've told you everything. I didn't do anything wrong." Craddock held up a hand. "Calm down, Dr. Sims. We're just asking questions. Stay in the village. We'll need to talk again." As they left, Miss Marple felt a tingle of excitement. Sims was rattled, his calm mask slipping, that frayed handkerchief, the photo, his quick guess about cyanide. It all pointed to him. But she needed more to be sure. Clara's vial and Roger's anger still lingered in her mind, and even Lynch, though she doubted him, couldn't be ruled out. Back at the police station, Craddock was grim. "He's nervous," he said. "That photo puts him at the glass, and the handkerchief's a match, at least in type. But we need proof of poison. The lab's still testing." Miss Marple nodded. "He's careful, Inspector, but careful people make mistakes when they're scared." Craddock chuckled. "You're something else, Miss Marple. I'm sending men to search his clinic. If he's got cyanide, we'll find it." She smiled but didn't reply. Her mind was already planning the next move. Sims was hiding something, but he wasn't the only one. She needed to check on Clara and Roger, to see if their secrets tied to Sims or pointed somewhere else. And that vial in Clara's handbag, she couldn't shake it. Poison was personal, and Clara's cool tears at the fate felt like a performance. As she walked home, the village seemed to watch her, its quiet houses full of eyes. She passed the Blue Boar Inn, where Lynch was smoking outside, his sharp face tense. He nodded to her, but she only smiled back. He was too obvious, she thought, like a villain in a play. The real culprit was quieter, trusted, someone like Sims, or maybe Clara, playing the grieving widow. At her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting untouched. She thought of a case years ago, a doctor who'd poisoned a patient to hide a debt. He'd been so kind, so respected, until a single clue, a dropped letter, gave him away. Sims reminded her of him, with his smiles and his secrets. The handkerchief was her letter, but she needed one more push to be sure. She decided to call Mrs. Bantry for tea tomorrow. Dolly would have heard more gossip, and gossip was like a net. It caught things you didn't expect. As she boiled the kettle, Miss Marple's mind kept turning. The photo, the handkerchief, Sims's twitchy hands. They were close, so close. But Clara's vial and Roger's bitterness kept her guessing. Someone had slipped cyanide into that glass, and they were still here, hiding in plain sight. "Dolly will love this," she murmured, smiling. Tomorrow she'd set a trap, not a big one, just a nudge. Guilty people always tripped over the little things, and Miss Marple was very good at finding them. Chapter 7. The Unexpected Suspect. The afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a soft glow, but a chill hung over the village as whispers of Mr. Grayson's murder spread like wildfire. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting untouched, her sharp blue eyes fixed on a single photograph, the one from the fete, showing Dr. Sims holding Grayson's glass with his handkerchief in hand. Her mind pieced together the puzzle. The bitter almond smell of cyanide, the torn scrap of cloth on the stage, Clara's mysterious vial, Roger's anger, and Sims's nervous habits. The village still pointed at Mr. Lynch, the brash outsider, but Miss Marple knew better. Dr. Sims, with his quiet smile and old grudge, was the key. Today, she'd prove it. Miss Marple had a plan. She'd asked Inspector Craddock to gather the suspects, Roger, Clara, Lynch and Sims, at the village hall for what she called a final chat about the fate. Craddock, used to her knack for solving mysteries, agreed, though he warned her to be careful. "Sims is slippery," he'd said. "We found no cyanide at his clinic, but that handkerchief's a match to the scrap. We're close." Miss Marple smiled. Close wasn't enough. She needed a confession, and she knew how to get one. She put on her best hat, a neat grey one with a small bow, and walked to the village hall, her knitting bag under her arm. The hall was quiet, its tables cleared of fate leftovers, replaced by a single round table with chairs for the suspects. Mrs. Bantry was there, her eyes wide with excitement. "Jane, you're up to something," she whispered. "I can tell." Miss Marple only smiled. "Just tying up loose ends, Dolly." Inspector Craddock arrived, followed by the suspects. Roger slouched in, his face pale and sulky. Clara glided in, her blonde hair perfect, her eyes dry despite her black dress. Lynch swaggered, his sharp face defiant, cigarette smoke trailing. Him. Dr. Sims came last, his smile polite, but his hands fidgeting, no handkerchief in sight. Miss Marple noticed that at once. "He's careful," she thought, "but not careful enough." Craddock cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming. Miss Marple has some thoughts about Mr. Grayson's death. We're here to clear things up." The suspects shifted, uneasy. Roger muttered something under his breath. Clara clutched her handbag. Miss Marple's eyes flicked to it, remembering the vial. Lynch snorted, crossing his arms. Sims sat still, his smile fixed, but his fingers tapped the table. Miss Marple stood, her voice gentle but clear. "It's such a sad thing, Mr. Grayson's death. Right in front of us at the fete. Cyanide, the police say. A terrible poison, quick and quiet. Someone slipped it into his lemonade, and I've been thinking about who could have done it." Lynch leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Why are we here? Everyone knows I argued with Grayson. Doesn't mean I killed him." Mr. Marple nodded. "True, Mr. Lynch. You're loud and you were angry. But poison isn't loud. It's clever. Someone planned this carefully. Someone who knew Mr. Grayson would drink that glass." Clara's eyes darted to Roger, then away. "It's awful," she said, her voice soft. "Harold was difficult, but I'd never hurt him." Roger glared at her. "Don't play innocent, Clara. You hated him, always complaining about being stuck." Clara's face tightened, but she said nothing. Miss Marple watched them, then turned to Sims. "Dr. Sims, you were so kind, helping at the fete, pouring lemonade, handing Mr. Grayson his glass. You knew he'd drink it, didn't you?" Sims's smile wavered. "I was just helping. Everyone was drinking lemonade. I didn't know anything about poison. Miss Marple pulled the photograph from her bag, holding it up. This picture says otherwise. Taken at the fete just before the auction. You're holding Mr. Grayson's glass, Dr. Sims, with your handkerchief in your other hand. You look careful, like you didn't want to touch the glass. The room went still. Craddock leaned forward, his eyes on Sims. Roger and Clara stared at the photo, then at Sims. Lynch raised an eyebrow, smirking. Sims's face paled, but he laughed a thin sound. That's nothing. I was just being tidy. Doctors keep things clean. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Clean, yes. But there's a scrap of cloth on the stage, torn from a handkerchief, just like yours. Linen, finely woven. The police have it. And young Tommy saw you by the lemonade table, looking sneaky. Why were you so nervous, Dr. Sims? Sims's hands clenched, then relaxed. Nervous? I was busy, that's all. You're making too much of this, Miss Marple. She stepped closer, her voice soft but sharp. Am I? You knew cyanide, didn't you? You called it right away when most wouldn't. And you had a reason. Mr. Grayson cheated you years ago, pulled his money from your practice. You lost everything, your savings, your dreams. That's a heavy grudge to carry. Sims stood, his chair scraping. This is nonsense. I didn't hold a grudge. Harold and I made peace. Craddock held up a hand. Sit down, Dr. Sims. We checked your records. You wrote to Grayson last year, begging for money to save your practice again. He refused, said you were a failure. Sims's face reddened, his eyes darting to the door. Miss Marple saw it, the crack in his mask. She pressed harder. That handkerchief, Dr. Sims, you used it to handle the cyanide, didn't you? To keep your hands clean. But you dropped a piece when you set the glass on the stage. A small mistake, but enough. Sims's voice rose shaky. You've got no proof. That scrap could be anyone's. Miss Marple smiled, calm as ever. The police are testing it, and they found something else. A vial of cyanide in your clinic, hidden in a locked drawer. You thought you were clever, but you forgot the little things. It was a bluff. The police hadn't found cyanide yet. But Miss Marple knew guilty people tripped over lies. Sims's face crumpled, his hands shaking. I didn't, he stammered, then stopped. The room was silent, all eyes on him. Clara gasped, her handbag slipping to the floor. Roger stared, his mouth open. Lynch let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be, he muttered. Sims sank into his chair, his head in his hands. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he whispered. Harold ruined me. He promised to help, then laughed in my face. I wanted him to pay. Craddock stood, his voice firm. Dr. Sims, you're under arrest for the murder of Harold Grayson. Sims didn't fight as the police led him away. His shoulders slumped. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Clara burst into tears, real ones this time, Miss Marple noted. Roger shook his head, muttering, I knew he was trouble. Lynch just smirked, lighting another cigarette. Mrs. Bantry grabbed Miss Marple's arm. Jane, you did it! In seconds, just like that. Miss Marple smiled faintly. It wasn't seconds, Dolly. It was days of watching, listening. People always give themselves away. As the suspects left, Craddock stayed behind, his notebook open. That was a bluff about the cyanide vial, wasn't it? He said, grinning. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "A little one. Guilty people. Panic inspector. You know that," he laughed. "You're something else, Miss Marple. We'll search his clinic again. Bet we find that vial now." She nodded, her mind already turning to the loose ends. Clara's vial had been a red herring. Probably just perfume, though she'd ask Craddock to check. Roger's anger was real, but he was no killer, just a bitter son. Lynch was innocent as she'd thought, his loud threats just noise. The handkerchief and the photo had been enough, along with Sims's own nerves to crack the case. As she walked home with Mrs. Bantry, the village felt lighter, the shadows gone. "Jane," Mrs. Bantry said, "how do you do it, spotting those tiny things?" Miss Marple chuckled. "People are like knitting, Dolly. One dropped stitch, and the whole pattern unravels." At her cottage, she sat by the fire, her knitting finally in hand. The puzzle was solved, but she'd keep an eye on the village. Secrets never stayed buried long in St. Mary Mead, and Miss Marple was always watching. Chapter 8. The Village Restored. The morning sun shone brightly over St. Mary Mead, washing away the shadows that had hung over the village since Mr. Grayson's murder at the charity fete. The green was quiet now, the colourful banners gone, but a sense of calm had settled in, like dust after a storm. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cosy cottage, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on her pink scarf. Her sharp blue eyes were thoughtful, reflecting on the puzzle she'd just solved. The cyanide in Grayson's glass, the scrap of handkerchief, Clara's vial, Roger's anger, and Dr. Sims's guilty confession. The village had been shaken, but justice was done, and Miss Marple felt the world was right again. Dr. Sims was gone, arrested yesterday after Miss Marple's trap at the village hall. His confession had stunned everyone. Roger, Clara, Lynch, even Inspector Craddock. Sims, the trusted doctor, had poisoned Grayson out of an old grudge, using his handkerchief to handle the cyanide and leave no traces. That torn scrap on their stage, caught in a photo, had been his undoing. Miss Marple smiled to herself. It was always the little things, a glance, a stitch, a piece of cloth, that revealed the truth. She sipped her tea, her mind tying up loose ends. Clara's vial, which had seemed so suspicious, turned out to be perfume, just as Miss Marple had begun to suspect. Craddock's men had checked it, finding nothing but a floral scent. Clara's tears, once so forced, were real now, born of shock and relief. Roger's anger had been just that, anger, not murder. He was no killer, just a son bitter at his father's scorn. And Mr. Lynch, the village's favourite villain, was innocent, his loud threats nothing but hot air. Miss Marple had known it wasn't him. The real culprit was always quieter, hiding behind a smile. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Mrs. Bantry burst in, her hat slightly crooked, her face alight with excitement. "Jane, you're the talk of the village. Everyone's saying how you caught Dr. Sims in seconds. That meeting yesterday, it was like something out of a book." Miss Marple chuckled, setting her knitting aside. "Hardly seconds, Dolly. It took days of watching, listening, and a little nudge to make him slip." Mrs. Bantry plopped into a chair, fanning herself. "Nudge! You practically pushed him into confessing. How did you know it was him, Monsieur? Marple poured her a cup of tea. It was the handkerchief, Dolly. He used it to handle the cyanide, to keep his hands clean. But he tore it on the stage, and that photo showed him with the glass. Then there was his grudge. Grayson ruined him years ago. People don't forget that kind of hurt. Mrs. Bantry shook her head, amazed. And to think we all trusted him. He was so kind, always smiling. That's how they hide, Miss Marple said softly. Behind smiles and good manners, but the little things give them away. A nervous hand, a torn cloth, a quick guess about poison. Mrs. Bantry sipped her tea, still buzzing. What about Clara and Roger? Are they all right? Miss Marple nodded. They'll be fine, I think. I saw them this morning walking together. Roger's taking over his father's business, and Clara's helping. They've had their differences, but grief can bring people closer. She'd passed Grayson's house earlier, seeing Roger and Clara in the garden, talking quietly. Roger's sulky frown was gone, replaced by a tired but determined look. Clara's hand rested on his arm, and for once it felt genuine. Miss Marple had heard from Mrs. Price that Grayson's new will left most of his money to the hospital, with enough for Clara and Roger to live comfortably. It wasn't what they'd hoped, perhaps, but it was fair. Money, Miss Marple knew, could spark murder, but it could also heal when it was shared. And Lynch? Mrs. Bantry asked. He's still at the Blue Boar, acting like he owns the place. Miss Marple smiled. Let him. He's harmless, just loud. He'll leave soon, and the village will forget him. Mrs. Bantry leaned forward. What about that vial in Clara's bag? I was sure she was hiding something. Just perfume, Miss Marple said. I thought it might be more, but sometimes a clue is just a mistake. The real answer was Sims. His handkerchief, his past, his nerves. Mrs. Bantry sighed. You're too clever, Jane. The village owes you. Nonsense, Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. I just listen to what people say. They tell their own stories, if you know where to look. As Mrs. Bantry chattered on, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the fate. It felt like weeks ago, though it was only days. The broken glass, the bitter smell, the crowd's gasps. She could still see it all. Sims had been so careful, but that torn handkerchief and his quick guess about cyanide had betrayed him. She remembered a case years ago, a quiet shopkeeper who'd poisoned his rival over a debt. He'd been clever too, until a dropped button gave him away. People were predictable, she thought. They hid their darkness, but it always slipped out. The village was healing now. Miss Marple had heard from Mrs. Clement that the Fates' money, over £200, had been donated to the hospital, just as Grayson would have wanted. The auction's prizes, including his gold watch, were being sold to add more. St. Mary Mead was coming together, as it always did after a storm. Neighbours were talking again, not just about murder, but about everyday things, gardens, recipes, the next church fair. Miss Marple liked that. Villages were like families. They fought and fussed, but they found their way back. She decided to visit the vicarage later, to thank Mrs. Clement for her help. Young Tommy, the raffle boy, deserved a kind word too. His nervous tip about Sims looking sneaky had been a spark, lighting the way to the truth. Miss Marple always noticed the quiet ones. They saw things others missed. As the afternoon wore on, Mrs. Bantry stayed, sharing village gossip. Miss Hartnell had sworn never to trust a new doctor again. Mrs. Price was now telling everyone she'd always suspected Sims. Even Mr. Lynch was quieter, packing to leave the Blue Boar. Miss Marple listened, her needles clicking, her mind half on the talk and half on the puzzle she'd solved. It was done, but she'd keep watching. St. Mary Mead was peaceful now, but peace never lasted forever. "Dolly," she said, cutting through Mrs. Bantry's chatter, "do you think a handkerchief can catch a killer?" Mrs. Bantry blinked. "What? Well, it did, didn't it? That scrap on the stage." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Exactly. A handkerchief can catch a killer, if you know where to look." Mrs. Bantry laughed, shaking her head. "Jane, you're impossible. What's next? Solving crimes with a teacup?" "Maybe," Miss Marple said, smiling. "Little things matter, don't they?" As Mrs. Bantry left, promising to call tomorrow, Miss Marple sat by her window, watching the sun dip low. The roses in her garden glowed and the village hummed with life. She thought of Sims, sitting in a cell now, his kind mask gone. She thought of Clara and Roger finding their way. She thought of the fete, the glass, the handkerchief, and the moment she'd known. It hadn't been seconds, not really, but to the village it felt like magic. Miss Marple didn't mind. Let them think what they liked. She'd done her part, and St. Mary Mead was whole again. She picked up her knitting, the pink scarf growing under her fingers. The puzzle was solved, the village restored, but her eyes stayed sharp, watching the lane outside. People were puzzles, and puzzles never stopped coming, and Miss Jane Marple was always ready.